visions of Revelation with the intervention of an angel. In fact, it's always the case. It's not something that springs out of John's head, or some guy comes along and says, hey, look about this. It's really the idea that an angel comes and speaks or does something, shows the initiative coming from God in this whole issue of Revelation here, which is the persecution of the Christians first in the first century, and also it's going to happen that this persecution will last quite a while. And then all the lessons we could draw from that, even for us today. I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and the great chain. So you see here that there's a place called heaven. Sometimes it's in a plural, actually, in the Bible, the heavenlies. We don't always see that, but here it's in the singular, used both ways. And so the angel is not from the earth. The angel is a special being, and he comes from heaven. And then he has in his hand a key, okay, to the bottomless pit and a great chain. So we see that he sees the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil, and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the pit and shut it up and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. You notice that the text here is in the past tense. It's important. People look at Revelation like something future. But here it's in the past tense, like this is already done. This has already happened. It's a vision. It's a symbol of something. It represents truth, spiritual or heavenly truth. Just like a parable would, in comparison, allegory, proverbs sometimes. It's a way of speaking, describing by imagery something. So if we think of imagery, and even there, the few verses we've read here, what does the imagery tell us? In other words, what is the spiritual meaning of the image? And not the image itself. We understand, here's an angel come from heaven. He's got a big chain, and he sees the devil, Satan, and binds him for 1,000 years, and throws him into a pit, shut it and seals it. So what is the lesson? That's what I'm asking. How would we say that in our own language, in our own English language of today? What do you see here? Any idea? Like I say, it's a painting, it's an image. Well, what does the image mean? So we have two creatures here, two spiritual beings, okay? What are the two spiritual beings? We have an angel from heaven. He's just a regular angel. And then what's the other spiritual being? Okay, Satan is called the devil. Okay, so the ancient serpent here is called the devil, is called Satan. You see the different terms described. Is this the first time in Revelation we see reference to the serpent or the devil? I don't think so. Is this the first time in the Bible we see that? So when do we talk about serpent or God's enemy, arch enemy in the Bible? When does it begin? Yeah, in the beginning. This is the same story with different words. It's the same idea. There's a battle. There's a spiritual battle going on. We tend to think sometimes that what we see is what's real. What I can touch and see, that's real. The stuff I don't see and can't touch with my senses, it doesn't exist. The Bible doesn't tell us that. In fact, it's the opposite. There is a whole kind of things going on, spiritual realities. There's heaven, there's God, there's angels, there's Satan. All of that you don't really perceive. But is it real? Well, according to the Bible, God, yes, says it's real. It's a real battle. Satan is enemy, the devil. Now, Satan is the Hebrew idea of God's enemy, God's adversary. The devil is more the Greek idea of the one who speaks against, the one who accuses, diabolos. And then the serpent is the imagery that we go back to Genesis, the serpent who tempts and makes Adam and Eve fall. But like I said, the battle with Satan, I would say, this being, and we could talk more about it, where does he come from? And is there any allusions to him? There are some, I think, in the Bible we can go to, but I don't want to go into that. But you see that he's there, and what happens to this Satan? Well, he's bound for 1,000 years. So it's about Satan being bound for 1,000 years. And notice that the 1,000 years is mentioned here right now. It's going to be mentioned a few times. When people talk about the 1,000 years, their idea in general is, if they haven't focused on the text, is, oh, 1,000 years, I know what that's about. That's Christ ruling on earth 1,000 years. Well, not here at this point. Is there any reference here to Christ reigning on earth 1,000 years? No, it's about Satan being bound for 1,000 years, which is interesting. I mean, if he's bound for 1,000 years, well, it looks like he's pretty powerless. He's out there and he can't do much harm. Well, that's a good news, I guess. So he may not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years are ended, and after that he must be released for a little while. Is 1,000 the number 1,000? You think that's you think that literally, really, in time, is it going? There's going to be a time when Satan will going to be totally bound for 1,000 years, like a real 1,000 years. And well, what do you think?
I don't think so.
You don't? Yeah.
It's in the future or something.
Yeah, but even though, do you think that Satan is going to be, according to New Testament teaching, Bible teaching, you think Satan is going to be at work doing evil stuff right until the time that Christ comes back? I think that's the biblical teaching. Satan is going to be active until the time Christ comes back, returns. I don't think that there's a teaching that literally for 1,000 years we're going to be okay with Satan. I mean, there's going to be, man, that would be great if Satan didn't do anything for 1,000 years. That doesn't work. But then he says, even though he is chained for 1,000 years in the imagery, then he says, but he is released for a little bit, for a little while. So what do you think is the meaning of that? It is a symbol. What's the meaning of that? Look at our life. We look at our life and we think of Satan like he's the big arch enemy of God. You know, he's really after us. But here it tells us, hey, an angel comes and he deals with him pretty efficiently, you know. It's amazing. He just puts him in a chain and for 1,000 years. That's showing the power of God over Satan. That's showing, I think for me that's showing, don't worry so much about him. Don't be obsessed with him, you know, to the point that you're so fearful and scared of Satan, you know, obsessed with it. I think there's a danger. It seems to me there's a danger with constant obsession and reference to Satan. The Bible talks about Satan. The Bible mentions Satan, but do you get the impression that this is really something that you've got to worry about day and night? Is that going to be your anxiety about Satan, you know, and you have to, how are you going to deal with Satan? Are you going to try and fight him? You know, are you going to have, do you need people in the churches to do exorcism, to have power to deal with Satan, to deliver people? Now that belief is very widespread among many believers, that in the church you need a ministry of deliverance. And what they mean by that, and I could mention names and groups, what they mean by that, you need people that have the power to curse Satan and to speak against him so that people can be delivered from Satan. To me, this imagery shows the opposite, shows, listen, first, it's not your prerogative. You look at the New Testament, there's no ministry that I see in the New Testament, in the church, of some people having the power to cast out demons. Do you see that? We have apostles, prophets, evangelists, elders, preachers. What is our main weapon? As far as a weapon to deal with Satan, we have a weapon, and what is it? We only have one. The Word. Now, the Satan, James says if you resist Satan, he gets away. He doesn't like it. He'll run away. Well, how do you resist Satan? The Word. And if you practice what God says, if you're in prayer, Satan is going to bother you. He's not going to bother you. This is the idea here. He's chained. But he is freed here. He is kind of released for a little while. Again, the imagery here is to show, yeah, but, his impact and his ability to destroy you and kill you and hurt you is limited. I think there are a lot of people that put so much stress on Satan. In fact, I think there's even a theology of Satan that kind of says that Satan is all kind of omniscient. Like he knows everything. He's not God. Come on. A simple angel can take care of him, not even an archangel. And look, there are how many angels in heaven? We can't count them according to Scripture. There are billions and billions of angels. So God says, okay, we got to deal with Satan. Let's have 10 million angels. One is enough. Not even an archangel. Well, that should be reassuring. All of that is reassuring, I think. So when people read that and they see that they've heard of Satan in Revelation 12 here, and he's powerful. But he's powerful also in this world that they're living in that has, I would say that these Roman emperors, and they're pretty satanic, and Satan is behind every Roman god. That's important to understand that. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, I believe, chapter 10, when you worship idols, there's no such thing as an idol, but there's a demon behind, hiding behind each idol. Whether it's Athena or whether it's all the Roman gods, Mars, all the gods, all the statues they worship, there's no God there. But behind the idea of worshiping that statue, Satan has convinced people that this is a god. It has powers. Well, that's the work of Satan, which is, of course, a lie. He works by lying. So the truth he doesn't like very much. I mean, I think people who lie a lot, they don't like the truth. You see, they don't like to be confronted with the truth, And, oh, man, I was lying there. So that's the idea. The truth is powerful enough. The Word of God is powerful enough. The faithfulness of the Christian, the prayers of the Christian, the fellowship of the church, these are the tools that God has given us. If you look at Ephesians 6, to all the ways that we can resist Satan, I don't see any exorcists. I don't see anybody with the power to go over you and deliver you from the power of Satan. Of course, when you go to Africa, you have to deal with things, that we don't deal here with, sorcerers and witchcraft. And, these are powerful people. You go to the African village, and I've been a little bit to Africa. Cam knows more than that. You go to the village, well, when you're going to preach the gospel, you're dealing sometimes with the most powerful guy in the village is not the politician or the rich CEO. The most powerful guy in the village is the witchcraft, is the sorcerer, because he has the power to curse on you. He's going to make curses on you, on people, so that they will hurt. That was practiced constantly in the Roman Empire. When the armies would go to war, even the armies of Julius Caesar, the armies of Rome would go to war, they would bring the priests, Roman priests. And what would they do? They would offer animal sacrifices, sometimes human sacrifices, and they would curse the enemies. Because they believed that if they cursed the enemies, they would win the war. And if you were a good person, a good Christian, and you became a Christian, and this family was worshiping such a Roman god, they would bring the priest in the house, and they would try and curse you because you become a Christian. Many, many things like that. And many things like that still exist in the world, I would say, in the non-Christianized world. And there's a lot of areas that have not been touched by the truth, by the Word of God, where such things are practiced. So when we get back into that context, we understand what's going on here. And it's interesting that he might not deceive the nations. So we talk about nations. The Old Testament specifically mainly talks about Israel. We talk about Israel in the Old Testament. Was Satan able to deceive Israel in many places and many times in history? Look at the history of Israel in the Old Testament. It's not brilliant. Not because they're Israelites, but because Satan is powerful. He's attacking them all the time, getting after them, false prophets, and this and that happening, and enemies from the outside, enemies from the inside. The temple at one point is full of prostitutes, according to Ezekiel. So Satan is at work against Israel. Well, the question is he at work against nations? Is Satan at work among nations today? Because when I talk about Revelation being specifically about Rome, people think, well, then that means he's not at work today. No, it's not about that. This is an example for us to understand. Once you understand the example, it's the same way it works. He's always works the same way. So who is going to deal with Satan here? Who is going to have the power to change Satan? Who has the power to do that? An angel. Well, who is behind the power of an angel? Who gives power to an angel? Okay, but who else? Who is sitting at the right hand of God has received all authority in heaven? Christ. The big hero in the Revelation is Christ. The one who comes, even in chapter 19, in fact, to come and has war against Satan and all of his angels, by the way, because there is also angels with Satan. Well, the Christ. So Christ is the victorious one. Christ is the one that has all power, and especially power over God's adversary. And he came for that. He came in the world for that. So then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Now, after that, he sees thrones. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and the word of God. So he's talking about now a category of people. And who are they? At this point, we don't see Christ coming and reigning in Israel for 1,000 years, like it's taught. And you won't see it. It's not there. But people read that into there, but it's not there. They've been so accustomed to thinking that's what it talks about, that they don't see that it doesn't talk about that. So that's kind of hard to take away from your brain something you think was there when it's not there. But anyway, who are these people that are going to reign on thrones? They're a specific category of people. Who are they? Well, it says, the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. No, they're not even, they are the souls of those people. They're the souls of those who have been beheaded. I mean, imagine that. They're on thrones, they have no heads. They don't need heads. Well, that's weird. How can you live without a head? Well, how can you live with Christ without a body? How can you die and be in a tomb and be alive? Well, that's the whole part of that whole thing about what we don't see, what we don't touch, about the heavenly world, about the heavenly realities. You're not dead. Jesus says God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jesus is transfigured in the Gospels, and who appears with him? Dead people. Moses and Elijah. Oh, I thought they were dead. No, they're alive. Oh, man, that's amazing. There's something there. Beyond the reality of the physical life, the physical body, and the physical life we have, there's the spiritual life, which is what God was trying to tell us in this word. Now, of course, I know there are a lot of people who don't believe that, because they believe only what they can see and touch. So they don't believe in Satan, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in anything like that. Well, that's too bad, because that's the world that God is trying to help us understand. So these were beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God. That brings us back to first chapter of Revelation. The reason that John himself was on the island of Patmos, he tells us in the beginning, first chapter, I don't know what verse 5 maybe, that he was there an exile because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. It's because of what they taught, they preached. You know, they didn't have in the Roman Empire part of the American Constitution, which is the free expression. You know, how does it say? Free speech or something, exactly. I don't know. Maybe somebody knows better. The free expression. You are free to express yourself, to speak. Freedom of speech. Oh, it's beautiful, freedom of speech. When you're at a place where you have freedom of speech, let's preach, man. Let's preach the gospel, because it's not everywhere like that. And it was not like that in the first century Roman Empire. You didn't have free expression to talk about Jesus, to talk about the gospel. Why? That's a great question. Because everything that Jesus taught, everything about Jesus, was totally different and against what those people believed. It was a totally different worldview. And it forced these people to change their lifestyle. They had to change their way of life, their way of behaving. Do people love to change? Do people love to be told you're wrong? Oh, that's great, I'm wrong. I like that. Thank you very much. Usually they don't like to be told they're wrong. Even at a very young age, I guess. Human beings don't like to be told they're wrong. But it's necessary sometimes to tell them they're wrong because that will help them. But they don't like that very much. Well, that's what's happening. So those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. Now, we know who those are. And we know what that mark is on the foreheads or the hand and the beast. Worship the beast. Who are we talking about? Well, the beast, we know what it is, the emperors and all. They worship the emperor. They worship all the gods. They say, no, I'm a Christian. I cannot worship. I have only one God I can worship. And that will destroy their finances. That will destroy their jobs. That will destroy everything because the whole society is based on that. It's built on that. And so you try and live without worshiping this God and that God. And, well, you can't do that in the Roman Empire. And it costs you a lot to become a Christian and to worship only the Lord. So that's what happened to them. They didn't receive the mark because the mark of the beast in Revelation is that, okay, if you have this mark 666, which is, the Revelation tells us what it is. It's just a mark of man. 3 times 6. What the Romans did is that if you were faithful to Rome and to the worship, to the idols, well, you could do business. You could buy, you could sell. That's what I'm talking about. Business, money, every trade, fishermen, carpenters, people who build houses, doctors. Every trade had their own patron god. If you were a fisherman, your patron god was Neptune. If you were a soldier, your patron god was Mars. So every god had to do with a trade. So you're a fisherman. All your friends, they worship Neptune. Once a week they get together, or twice a week they get together and offer sacrifices so you can have good fishing. And then you become a Christian. So the time that they get together, your friends, to worship Neptune, you're not there, or you're there, but you don't worship Neptune. They say, what's the matter with you? We're going to have bad fishing if you don't worship Neptune. I can't worship Neptune because he doesn't exist. He's not a god. I'm a Christian. Well, you're done. Your job is finished. Oh. Persecution was also financial in the first century. Because when you hit people at their finances, you're really hitting them hard. How are you going to feed your family? Now you have to close your baker shop today for such and such reason. It's not new, this idea. It went back in the first century. So that's what it was, the mark of the beast. If you read it carefully, like I said, you cannot buy, you cannot sell. Because those who have that mark, they can do that. The Christians, they don't want the mark. They have the name of Christ on their hands, the name of the Lord. So they don't get involved in all that. It limits them a lot. So they come to life and they reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Still, we don't see that Christ is coming and reigning for 1,000 years on earth. It's not said here. It's talking about those martyrs, those who were suffered under persecution. They come back to life and they reign with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed are the holy who shares in the first resurrection. So those who are blessed with the first resurrection, who are they? They're not everybody. They're a category of Christians. What is that category in the vision? It's those who had been persecuted, martyred for their faith. In that vision, they're the first to raise and to reign with Christ. Now, what you have with this is that you have people then who believe that actually there are going to be two resurrections. It's taught, and some churches teach that officially. There's going to be one resurrection of the faithful, and then there's going to be a time, sometimes they think it's 1,000 years, so they put that in there, and then there's going to be a second resurrection of everybody else. It gets all very complicated, you know. This is not what this is talking about. It's not giving us a chronology, telling us this is what's going to happen literally, historically. It's showing us how God looks at these martyrs, how God gives them honor, how God raises them, how God puts them on thrones where they judge. It's all a vision, an encouragement. So they will be the priest of God and for Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. The same people we're talking about here. At this point, we have not seen yet in this text that Christ will come and reign for 1,000 years. Now you have the premillennialists, which started around 1850, 1860, that teaching with Darby and Schofield. And then you have the postmillennialists, and then you have the amillennialists, and all are wrong. All are mistaken. Oh, just very briefly, the premillennialists, or dispensationalists at Schofield, the premillennialists believe that Christ will return from the sky, like we know he's coming back. But when he returns to Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, and he reigns as a king over Israel for 1,000 years. And that's the rule of the Christ over the earth, over the nations, which will find peace and prosperity, and especially Israel, for 1,000 years. That's the premillennialists. They really believe that. At this point, it doesn't say anything like that here. But they take that 1,000 years and they make it like the centerpiece of this whole, future, the last days. Now the postmillennialists are different because, and that was taught for a long time, not taught anymore so much. Postmillennialists believe that there would be a period of 1,000 years on earth when the gospel would be preached and people would convert by the millions, and it would bring a lot of great things on earth. It would bring peace on earth. And then once that would happen, then Christ would come and rule. That's the postmillennialists. And a lot of our restoration preachers believe that. Alexander Campbell believed that. His magazine, which I've read years ago, The Millennial Harbinger. Now, what he believed is not exactly that, but what he believed was that the restoration movement, the restoring of the early church, would spread worldwide. It would bring about a renewal of Christianity for a long period of time. What he thought 1,000 years was symbolical, and he was right in that. And after that great evangelism of the earth, Christ would come back. Now, that idea is not completely, maybe you can kind of figure that out from Scripture. I don't want to go into that. I'm not one to believe that, but I think there's the idea in the New Testament that the gospel spreading to all nations, to all languages, and then when that happens, Christ comes back. That to me is more logical than the other one. Now the amillennialists, the traditional amillennialists, it goes back to Augustine, in the 4th century. Now what Augustine believed is that this is symbolical, and he was right. But he thought that this describes the triumph of the church, because when Augustine is teaching, he's from Cathart, from the North Africa. When Augustine is teaching, he comes from the Gnostic background. He's converted. You can read that in his writings. And then he becomes the doctor of the church. And the church in Rome at that point is pretty powerful already, and getting more and more powerful. You have bishops, and you don't have a pope yet, but it's developing. And so the church in Rome is becoming very powerful. Rome is going down. The Roman Empire is kind of going down. And the idea that Augustine develops in his book, The City of God, is that you're going to have two powers on this earth until the return of Christ. You have the political powers of the nations, but then you have the church, which is going to become the great power over everybody. And so that's the idea. The triumphant church, which becomes the Roman Catholic Church, becomes the power over all the nations and controls them. And he says, you better be careful. You be a Christian, or I'll going to take your head off. That's problematic. You're not a Christian, you don't get a job. That's problematic. You see what we're getting here with the power of the church? Well, you study the 7th, 8th century, you study Charlemagne, you study the Middle Ages in Europe. Ooh, you better be a Christian. You better go show up at church or you get it if you don't show up at church. That's the triumphant church. Now, it becomes problematic. That's what we call Christendom. The church becomes so politically involved, so powerful. The church has armies. The Pope has armies. They come and get you if you're not a good Christian. Even the reformers believe that. Calvin had police people going around to make sure people come to church. In Geneva, a reformer. If people played games at cards, they were denounced and judged. Don't do that if you're a Christian. You drink a glass of wine, don't do that. You know, this is the power of police and politics used to make people, force them to be Christians. That's a problem too. This is not what this is talking about here, the 1,000 years. So that's the amillennial. So who is wrong in that? They're all wrong. Because it's not what it's talking about. Just go back to the text, stick with it. Don't try and put your ideas in there, and that's fine. Oh, I need to finish up. Anyway, I guess, I guess I've said enough because it's time to stop. But anyway, that's interesting stuff. Because this 1,000 years has really, really, a lot of people believe in it so much. And I don't want to add into that the Great Tribulation, mentioned in 7:14, the Great Tribulation. There were 7 years of tribulation. Is it before the 1,000 years? Is it after? Post-tribulationist, premillennialist, pre-tribulationist, premillennialist, two different stories. These things like that are going on, And what about the rapture? What about Israel? All of that is kind of put together in that bag, but it's never there anywhere. You have to kind of put these verses, kind of fabricate this end of time scheme, and then you get, but there's about a dozen theories that are contradictory, so you got a problem when you take scripture like a puzzle. You have a puzzle, you take this piece, you put it there, you have that piece, you put it there, and you reconstruct. No, the Bible, you can't interpret the Bible putting verses together that have no connection. That's what people have done. They use the Bible like a puzzle. Keep it in the context. Be faithful to the text. Don't try to add. Maybe that's why we have that warning in Revelation in the end. Don't add. Don't take away, but don't add. Take it as it stands. Read it in the context. Respect the text. And don't try to satisfy your curiosity because we don't know. There are a lot of things we don't know about the return of Christ. I don't claim that I know. I don't know. People in Corinth were asking Paul, no, how can you believe in the resurrection? Tell us how their body is going to be. How can you be raised from the dead and have a body? Chapter 20, verse 11, I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. This is not like new. The throne goes back to the beginning. Basically, it's the central focus of the whole book of Revelation. When you go back to chapter 4, there's the throne. Who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. That's an interesting description. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. And then another book was opened, and which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. That is repeated twice, actually. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of the fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. We read sometimes Revelation like prophetical in the sense this is announcing events of the future. Well, there's truth to that, but it's not so much that, I think. This is a vision. And when God gives a vision about heavenly things,
like to the prophets. It happened. Isaiah had visions, Daniel. It's a teaching device. Remember, look at Hebrews, the beginning of Hebrews. I want to just show you there. The beginning of Hebrews, here's what he says. Long ago, at many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. This is my Son, listen to him. But God revealed himself in many ways. One of the ways he revealed himself is visions. Not to every prophet, but visions. Visions is talking about what people are seeing. It's visionary. You see something like you see a dragon. And the dragon means something. You see people that are beheaded and are praying. That means something. So we have to remember this is a teaching device. In other words, we have to understand what is the spiritual meaning. When we take visions literally to the point where we think it's really going like that, we forget this is a device. Really, it's like when Jesus talks parables, tells us parables, little stories, there is spiritual meaning in it. But we can miss the spiritual meaning if we put so much emphasis on the example itself. You know what I mean? On the actual story and make it the focus. And then we begin to argue about details. Parables is an example. It's an illustration about a certain point. And it's like that here. This is a point that's being made. We have to kind of keep it like that. What is the point that's being made here? Well, obviously, we see when we read from the beginning, goes back to the beginning of the book. Revelation is repetitive. It's just amplifying. It's like in geology, you have this stone, this rock, these rocks, and these ones. They're just on top of each other, and they form a whole thing. So it's kind of this is another layer of the first vision in chapter 4, which is the vision of the throne, which is the most important vision. If there's a throne, that means there is a king, there is a ruler. There's somebody in authority, there's somebody in control. Do you think that most people today around us, in this society we live in, they look at life, they look at reality as being a hierarchy? Where there's actually a hierarchy? Where there is a God that's up there that has authority and power? He's a king. I'm not sure that a lot of people see reality like that. Less and less, because the Bible reveals to us this is the way the world is built. There's a hierarchy, and we're not at the top. We're not necessarily at the bottom either, but we're not at the top. And then there are angels, and even among angels there's hierarchy. There's archangels. There's cherubim, and we see that, in fact, in the beginning of the vision. There's hierarchy. There's positions. There's things. This lamb in the beginning in Revelation 4, it's part of the vision. What is he doing? Well, in the beginning, he's between the throne and the people. Well, what does that mean? Does that have a meaning? Or is that physical? Is Jesus physically really between people and the throne? Is that a physical thing or is that a spiritual thing? What do you think? It's spiritual. What does it mean that Jesus is in between? We know what it means. Huh? He's high priest, he's mediator. But the vision shows the Lamb going to the throne because he's invited to go to the throne, and now he is the only one who can open the revelation. And ever since, in the beginning of chapter 4, he goes to the throne, he stays there. He doesn't move from there. He's there. He's there to the end. And that's, of course, what happens. Jesus comes as a mediator, as a human being, born of the flesh, born of David, as Paul says in Romans, but declared Son of God by his resurrection. That's Romans 1, 1 through 8. But then he ascends to the right hand of God, and he receives all power and authority. This is the whole story. So if we see a throne here, a white throne of judgment, does that include the Lamb? If we follow correctly what we see from the beginning, or is that just a father? Because there are a lot of people who teach that Jesus is basically just an angel. There's nothing divine about him, there's nothing godly about him. Like Jehovah's Witnesses teach that. But is that really what this is showing? When we see the throne, we're going to see, and if we continue to read in chapter 22 and all to the end, the Lamb is there, and in fact, he is actually in a position of judgment, which is not a new concept. It's not like, oh, wow, really, this is new. No, this is, even when Jesus was teaching in his human form, he was talking about him being the judge. He says, John chapter 12, you will be judged by my words. So there's a judgment aspect of Jesus. Okay, and so now he sees the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. It's a vision. So we understand something about the resurrection. First of all, there is a resurrection. Well, that's good to know. It's important to know. Why would it be important to know? Well, when Paul preached the resurrection, remember in Acts 17, you had the Stoicians, you had the philosophers that were there. How did they react when Paul mentioned the resurrected one sitting at the right hand of God who's going to judge the world? What was their reaction? If you remember, they laughed and left. They disbelieved. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They believed only what's material. The Sadducees, a whole group of Jews, didn't believe in the resurrection. It's all under the Greek philosophy. But here there's a resurrection. It's pretty clear. But then what we learn here is something kind of interesting and important, is that we have books that are open. Okay, so there's several books. First of all, we usually talk about the book of life. We understand that. But look, how many books are there? Do we know? Does it tell us like 50 books, 100 books, 1,000 books? Does it tell us? No. But the fact is, there's several books. Now, does it give us a technical detail of each book, what it was? We would like to know, maybe. No. The Bible is not a technical document. You look for how to understand an engine of a car. I've done that once or twice, and in 5 minutes I closed it because I don't understand. It tells you this and this and this part, that part, that part. You get this part. This is technicality. People read the Bible like that, you get lost. It's not about that. There's a point that's being made here. So there are books. And then another book was opened, which is the book of life. So here's an interesting idea about the judgment. There are several books. What would you think that means when it said there are several books, and then there's one book, the book of life? And we don't know what these books are. What do you conclude from that?
We're not meant to know.
Exactly. That's a good answer. That's exactly what I was going to answer. That's good. Yeah, we don't know everything. Is it hard for us when somebody asks us a question about God or something? Is it hard for us sometimes to say, I don't know? That happens to me almost every day. I had this course on Romans. I had about 3 questions about this and that. I said, I don't know. They surprised. Am I supposed to know everything? Being a Christian, does it mean that, or a Bible teacher, that you can answer every question? No. In the beginning, God took earth. He took the earth there, Adama. He took it and he made a man. He made a man out of that. If I am asked a question, explain to it that process. How did they do it? You know what I'm going to say? I don't know. How is that you don't know? Well, he rose Lazarus from the dead. How did he do it? I don't know. See, that's the point. The modern man is a rational man. He wants to have explained everything. If he cannot explain one single point of the faith, he gives up his faith. Did you notice that? People come to you that, I don't really believe. Why? Tell me why. Well, there's this little thing here, and this little problem here. Oh, all right. Well, you're never going to believe, because a lot of things about God, about Jesus, you cannot explain. Do you think that your brain was made to be able to explain everything? Then you would be God. The Bible would say that as a human, you're omniscient. That means you know everything. Am I omniscient? No. Who is omniscient? God. Do I accept that I'm not omniscient? That's the question. Do I accept I don't know everything? That's the question today. Why are we supposed to know everything? And why people think they have to have all the answers about everything before they come to faith? I can't count how many people that I was wondering, why are they not baptized yet? Why are they waiting 10, 15 years? And then I figure out after a while, yeah, but there's this thing here I don't understand. Oh, wow. Well, you can wait 300 years. You'll still not be baptized. Yeah, you got to learn all these things. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean you need to be totally ignorant. It doesn't mean you need to have an answer to everything. There's a balance, I guess.
We just go back to, there's still that verse, Deuteronomy 29:29.
There is, exactly. It's such a good verse. Yeah.
That's it.
What God has revealed. In fact, what God has hidden is called mystery. And that's an interesting word because it means what is hidden, what is veiled. But anyway, so we have books, and I don't know how many there are. Like I say, it's fascinating to know that God has books. There are a lot of things God knows about us, about the universe. Are there other living creatures in the universe? Is that a question that you've been asked? Am I in a position with my Bible to be able to affirm one way or the other? I don't think I have any way from the Bible that I can say yes or no. Is that important? For some people, yes. If you can't answer that question, you're not going to become Christian. That's weird. That's strange. You know, there are things I don't know. Well, let's discover the universe. You know, how long is it going to take to go all the way to whatever next galaxy is, you know? We can't even go to Mars. It takes, I think, 7 or 9 years, according to what they're planning. So, you know, let's just be humble a little bit. Let's be modest. If there are, well, thank God. If they're not, thank God. One way or the other doesn't make any difference. Now, the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. So you notice something about the books in the plural. It does concern, it looks like the books have to do with what people have done. So whatever people have done is written in books. All right. If I can find an analogy to that, maybe we all have a bank account somewhere, and if you go to the bank and if you don't have the internet, you want to check what's in my bank account, they have the books of each one. Well, you have that much. You used to have to go to the bank to know that. You have so much, you have so much, you have so much, you have so much. That's what you owe or you don't owe. That's your debit, or, you know, that's the thing. But then there's a special kind of book which is different, because it's not really what they've done or not done. That other book is called what? The book of life. So on that book, you have the word life. These are the people that are alive, that have life. And there are people who have their names in there. Not everybody. So the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Okay? It's interesting by the way that the sea gave up the dead who were in it. We sometimes have questions about that, you know, many questions. Okay, this person was drowned, you know, are they going to come up at the resurrection? What about this person was burned? This person was cremated. I mean, being cremated, being burnt in a fire, to me, I don't see much difference. Yes?
Did the Jews have like a lot of burial rites as far as regulations?
Oh, yes.
Come in different, I know the bone body ossuaries and things like that.
Yes. Not necessarily from the law of Moses. That doesn't have a lot on that. But it could have come from Egypt, I would think, because Egypt had a big influence, you know, for 400 years on their ways. And so Egyptians were famous for that, you know, trying to keep...
Everything has to be just right.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But here, we see that it's not like that. In fact, if you read in Hebrews 11, you see it talks about those ones who were martyred. Some went sawn in pieces, you know, others were killed that way, and the body is the body. It doesn't matter. I mean, don't fear those who can kill the body. Well, maybe they'll burn you. You know, people have been burned at the stake because they translated the Bible, you know, like Wycliffe or John Huss in Czech Republic, in Czechoslovakia, 1400s, burnt because he translated the Bible, burned by bishops. So there are people who were martyred. Nero, he did horrible things that are mentioned by church historians to believers, dragging them. They were eaten by lions. So when somebody eaten by a lion, how are they going to be raised from the dead? I've been asked the question. Well, I'm not God. I don't know how God does it, but He can do that, man. He can sure do that. Apparently.
You could just point out that He made you from one cell.
That's so true. Yeah. Does He need a lot?
He didn't need a lot.
That's right. And DNA and all of that. Now we can use sometimes even DNA to figure out, like this guy. Oh, he's the father of this one. Ooh, we discovered something. So it's powerful. I mean, there's a lot of information that we don't know about, even genetically and all of that. And of course, God knows that. All the information, is there about who we are or we are not. So they were done according to what they had done. Death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. If anyone's name was not found in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. I think here he's showing the judgment under different aspects. But what we see here, is, the way I understand it, is that it's very important to look at this book of life. And if you look at the book of life, it doesn't say anything about to me, it doesn't say anything about what they had done or not done. Because if we are to be judged by God based on what we've done or not done, on our actions, all our actions, where do you think we're going to go? Yeah, exactly. That's what it teaches here. Does it mean we don't need to do anything? That means we can just disobey God? It's not about that. What it's saying is that whatever the case, whoever is in the book of life, if they're in the book of life, it's not based on what they've done or not done. It's based on what Christ has done.
So going back to 1 Corinthians 13, the nature of God, God is love.
Yeah.
And love keeps no record of wrong.
That's a good point. And in God, it gives us the first example. In fact, it's a good point because when we define love in 1 Corinthians 13, we could start with, is this the way God is? God is patient, and all of that. Yes, right. There's no recording. The book of life apparently is not there to record all the stuff you did and not do. It wouldn't be called the book of life. It'd be just the book of the judge. I don't know of any judge that I know of that has a book of life in front of him. Okay, I'm going to open the book of life. Okay, this guy comes, he's guilty, he's done this. Oh, well, you're in the book of life. You can go free, man. You're the non-guilty guy. You can go. We don't have that power. As human beings, we don't have that power. And even God doesn't have that power. Unless something special happens that allows God to give you life. It's called grace. It's called salvation. It's called forgiveness. Of course, you always have people who are going to say, if it's by grace, if it's by God's love, then let's just go ahead and sin. Who cares? I'm not sure that God likes that very much. We know from the teachings, is it because we're saved by grace now we should sin so that grace would abound? Now, of course, that was an accusation that the Jews were making against Paul in Rome. Here's what this guy is teaching, they would say, the rabbis. This guy's teaching that you're saved by grace. You know what that means? You can do whatever you want. It's not what Paul ever said, but that's what they claimed he said. So that's why he's asking the question in Romans. In fact, in Romans, he asks a lot of questions, if you notice. Just like in 1 Corinthians, you ask a question and answer. You know where these questions come from? Those rabbis. Acts 28, the end of the book of Acts. You have to remember that Acts 28. Paul is in prison in Rome. He has a house. The Jews are coming. The Jewish leaders of Rome, the biggest city in the world, maybe 500,000 people. They're coming to his home to talk to this rabbi. If you read the chapter, you'll understand something in Acts 28. Because there you see that he spent a whole day talking to them, like at one point, a whole day, morning to evening, about Scripture, about Jesus. And you know what it says? Some of them believed, and others, they couldn't believe what he said. So you have that. These people don't believe, those who believe. They don't understand his teaching. So the death and Hades were thrown into lake of fire. How do you throw death and Hades into fire? I mean, who is death and Hades? Like two people that you grab them by the hair, you know. You are death, I'm going to throw you in a lake of fire. And that's an image. Obviously, it's imagery. If we think literally God grabs death, it's not a person, it's a personification. It helps to understand. But that is very important because death is part of this whole book of Revelation from the beginning. Death is really what makes this whole book so fascinating because it's all over. Blood and death, is there because the context means that. What's happening in the first century when John is on the island? What's going to happen more than what's happening? What's happened before? John is writing at the time of Vespasian, the emperor, which was sort of a calm period of time between the big persecutions of Rome that were going to come and between Nero and then Domitian and these others. So Vespasian is kind of an older gentleman, not brutal, kind of a wise guy, sort of kind, recognized as a kind fellow, interesting among the Roman emperors. And it's at that time that John is at Patmos. But Revelation, the Lord is telling John, this is going to be worse. He's warning the churches. But what's happening? Well, we know a lot of Christians are being killed, martyrs by the thousands. It's going to come. It has already been there with Nero. It's going to come and get worse. So death is there. And in the beginning, you remember they are crying. You know, say, how long will we have to be put to death like that? How long will we have to go through this? Being killed by the lions, or like being put on torches, like put on crosses like Nero did, and light the skies with the bodies of those Christians that would burn. Stuff like that they would do. And how long is that going to last? And so the death is there, present, and it's a difficult time to live as a Christian. You go through that. But here's the hope. Death will end. Now, there's a difference that's made between death and Hades. What is that? Well, the word Hades is not just a New Testament concept. The concept of Hades is also a concept in the Old Testament. It's not called Hades, but it's the same concept of the place of the dead. It's a mysterious word, in a sense, because even though it's there's Hades, place of the dead, it does indicate to me that the dead are not totally disintegrated and have disappeared, like they're gone. This is the Jehovah's Witness teaching. There's no soul. We don't have a soul. We're finished. And that's the condemnation of God. But Hades is a place. Well, like in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, there's Hades there. And both are in Hades. It's interesting, the rich man and Lazarus. But there's a separation. So the good and the bad are in the same place. All right, in Hades. But with this judgment that comes, this is where this sort of like, it seems like a period of transition for the dead. The dead are dead. They're not raised. So they're called in Hades. They're in a waiting situation, I would say, from what I gather in the New Testament. But the end of that is the resurrection, when the soul and the body are put back together, and that's the resurrection, the glorification, all of that, which people, again, will ask tons of questions. And if they don't have their answer, they're not going to believe. You remember the question that was asked to Paul and were answered in 1 Corinthians 15. Here's the question that some of the Corinthians were asking. Paul, you believe in the resurrection, in the final resurrection. Explain to us what kind of body they're coming back in. Do I know? Can I make you a drawing and show you what it looks like? That's what they wanted. Well, the fact is it never happened before, first of all, and it could be that you don't have words to describe it. Is there possibility that there are things we cannot explain with our human logic? Is that possible? That our human logic has limitations? Let's think about that. No, we know everything today. Huh? We have computers, we're so smart, we have answer to everything. You know when people who are very educated become fools? At what point? I think, is when they think they know everything. Now, when they think the hyper-experts, they know everything, they become crazy. They lose their wisdom because they lose humility, which is the basis of wisdom. So you don't have to go to university and have a lot of degrees to be wise. You have to listen to God first and be humble. That's basic of wisdom. Anyway, so Hades just means the place of the dead. Is it a specific area that we make a drawing? You've seen these drawings, this is Hades, it's a word. It's the place where the dead are. But what that means is, to me, is that they're there. It's not like, if the Bible would say they die and that's it, it's finished, they don't exist anymore, that's the teaching again of Jehovah's Witnesses, I would understand if it doesn't say that. Say there is Hades. So they are somewhere, and there is something the Bible calls the soul, or the spirit, sometimes one or the other. And Ecclesiastes even says that, the spirit, returns to God.
So it's like in the Old Testament, a lot of times they talked about someone died and they became at rest.
Yes.
That's the way that I always think. That's sort of like, that's that idea that you died and you're resting. It's like
There is the idea, that's right. That's right. Even sometimes compared to sleep. They call Sheol in the Hebrew. It's not really a sleep like a sleep, but it can be compared maybe to that. Because it's,
like rest from work, like what we talk about people being tired. They don't have to work to provide for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. And so is it like rest is longer, it's like you're not heavy.
Yes and no.
You're no longer bound by the earthly.
Yeah, yes and no, because the rich man, he was not very restful in Hades.
So we're taught to seek not to talk to the dead.
Yes.
If there's no.
So, exactly.
Called back by Saul.
Yeah,
So if you can't talk to the dead,
Yeah.
why would we?
That's right.
Be a question of
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the Greeks didn't believe in soul and all of that. Many of them, not all of them, not the Platonists. But the Sadducees were very influential. They didn't believe in the soul, they didn't believe in angels, they believed in the resurrection. You wonder what they believed in. They're just like modern people today, believe only what they see and touch. They're materialistic. But there are a lot of questions about death. And sometimes it's funny to me that what prevents people from coming to God is all these questions. Instead of saying, here's what we know about Jesus, he lived, and he did this, he rose the dead, and he said this, and then we take that and we come to God, then the problem is it's the opposite way of looking at things, to say, yeah, but there's this issue, and I don't understand this about that, so I'm not going to commit myself. Well, you can wait a long time to have all these answers that you want. And it's hard sometimes for us as Christians to say to people, I don't really know that from the Bible. And I was asked a question, I think it was actually yesterday. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was in the Romans. I'm teaching Romans there. And I had to say, well, I don't see a biblical way to answer that. That was my answer. I could answer from my own view what this could be, but biblically speaking, I don't have an answer to that specific question. Sometimes we have to say that, because there are a lot of questions that people can ask. That, well, it's a strange attitude. The modern man thinks that he's got to have all the answers to obey God, or come to God, or come to church, or attend worship. Do people do that in any other area? I don't know. If they're going to be employed for a job, well, they know about it. This is the boss. This is what I'm going to do. But do they have questions maybe about it? And maybe, I have this little thing. I'm not sure, so I'm not going to take that job. Is that how they react?
Sometimes, yeah.
There are people like that. Those who are sometimes jobless for a long time. They made themselves jobless, maybe. And there are people who make themselves non-Christian, I would say, But it's sad, because and this is a big question, do we have enough evidence that there is a God, that Jesus was his son? I think we have a bunch.
So what we're lacking is faith and trust.
That's the problem. Faith and trust. And that lack of faith and trust in God reflects in the relationships in the world. We don't trust people in the modern world. You would think they communicate, they have all these phones, but the more they have phones and ways to communicate, the less they trust each other, it seems to me. There's mistrust is growing. It's hard to trust people. I was talking to these students in Quebec and say, you know, it's amazing that in about 23, 24 years, since the Christ rose from the dead, Paul wrote Romans in about 56. In about 24, 25 years, Paul can say to the Romans that the whole world had heard the gospel. How did they do it without internet, without phone, without trains and airplanes and cars?
Strangely, the mission was a big piece of that, because when he started persecuting, people started.
That's true. But even in the book of Acts, in the beginning, the gospel is spreading quickly. So in a matter of such a short time, the whole world had heard the gospel. Here's what I think happened. The reason it did like that is because the quality of human interaction was high, much superior to what it is today. The people had time to go in the market and talk to each other. There was an African guy in the course from Congo. I said to the guy, when you go to the market, you're in Congo. I've been to Congo. You go there. Do you talk to each other? Oh, yeah, everybody talks, and all of that. You think it's the way it happens like that? And when you go shopping, in America, you go to Walmart. Does everybody stop to each other and talk to each other like that? If you did that, what would happen? You go in Walmart and start stopping every person saying, do you know about Jesus Christ? You might get thrown out. You might. That would be weird, but not in Africa. People talk to each other. They take time for that. Well, that's the first century. Imagine that the gospel spread so quickly, not because they had all the technology, but people would take time to talk to each other. That's all it took.
People were open.
Yeah, and trusting. They had belief, they had faith, but this systematic unbelief and suspicion about everything, it becomes suspicion about people. Everybody's suspicious about everybody because when you don't have trust in God, well, you don't have foundation, then you are suspicious of everybody, so you don't talk to everybody.
I got an example of that. I don't want to embarrass Steve, but faith and trust, and there was a man had broken down yesterday on the side of the road. Well, in my mind, forgive me, I came from California, in my mind, I'm thinking all the bad things can happen. In my mind, I said, we got to stop. It's a proper Christian thing to do. Help. Steve didn't have any hesitation at all.
Wow. That's beautiful.
A step further than certainly were mine.
Whenever I go to California, I pray a lot. I don't know why. That's kind of a joke. There are wonderful people in California. So everywhere. But
I want to say one thing. I think the book of life is the vision, is reminding us that your name's in the book of life. You don't have to worry.
if you what?
Your name is in the book of life.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, it's reassuring. It's comforting. It's part of the hope. And what's amazing about that, then you don't have to be, it's not that you don't have to be concerned with what you've done or not done, but that's not the foundation. This is not where your hope lies. Oh, I did so well. Oh, I didn't do that sin, Well, there's truth to that. You got to be careful with God. You got to fear God. But your foundation, it's Christ who gives you the life. I am the way, the life, and the truth. It's very important. But to me, why is it that from the beginning, in fact, in the New Testament, why is it that this teaching of hope has been so abused from the start? Why is it that people can take the teaching of Paul and say, well, now that we have grace, we can sin more and more? so grace can abound. Why is it that we find the book of Jude, for example, or 2 Peter, we find these people are sinful, they come to church, but they don't care about God. And you find in the Revelation, the churches, why is it that God's grace, instead of being something that makes us progress spiritually, for some people, it's an excuse to do bad? It's an interesting concept, isn't it? There's a problem with the heart. Because the problem is, do we love the Lord? Do we love his way? Do we love the truth? Do we love God with all our heart? That's where the real issue is.